All right, guys. So I've been thinking about the hard problem of consciousness all day, reading Bloch's 1995 or 6 paper, whatever it was, on a confusion about a function of consciousness, phenomenal and access consciousness, reading Chalmers' meta problem. That was all this morning. Of course, I was preparing to go to a seminar that Tony Rowe and I are teaching at the Graduate Center on the neuroscience and philosophy of consciousness, where we had a 2 hour discussion about the hard problem and whether there is a hard problem and what should science do about this. Ignore it, change the subject, look somewhere else, whatever the questions may be. So it was going all day. So then I get on the train and I'm on my way home. I'm thinking to myself, gee, I just want to tune out and not think about consciousness for one moment in my life, perhaps. Is that possible? So, lo and behold, I turn on YouTube and what do I see? Brian Greene fights against anti-science and string theory debunkers all live. I thought, okay, this has nothing to do with consciousness. I like Brian Greene. He's talking to Richard Dawkins. This looks like a very cool conversation. And it turns out it is a cool conversation until about 27 minutes in, when all of a sudden Brian Greene brings up David Chalmers and the hard problem of consciousness. Oh, so of course they were talking about life before this. That's what segued into this. So I thought, holy moly, I didn't expect that. Well, look, my stop is coming. So here I am now at home after having just been subjected to this on the train. And I figured, okay, I'll watch the rest of this, but why not watch it with you guys instead of just watching it by myself? I mean, I don't really know how to record this on the train, so I haven't gone into all that stuff. I guess I did record one video when I was on the train, and people thought I was weird just talking to the camera, but that was a long time ago. That wasn't even on the train. I was at the train station, actually, but people still thought I was weird. What was that? That was transhumanism, existentialism, and transhumanism, or something. I was back then. Okay, anyway, but so they're talking about the hard problem. I think this is this where it was?
An electron, if it has no inner sensation.
Yeah, this is right when they started. He brought it up.
Modern era, David Chalmers is famous.
Yeah. See, whacked me out of the blue here. I was like, holy moly. So let's just rewind this a tad bit so we can get back to the context.
He said heavier than air flight is impossible.
Oh, yeah. This is the part where they were bashing on Lord Kelvin, who allegedly made a lot of silly predictions about the future of physics. So that was quite hilarious.
Possible.
Geez, you're really taking my hero and just cutting the legs out of it.
Well, no, he was a great physicist for his time, but he also gave Darwin some grief because
I opened a can of worms here. This is fantastic. Yeah, go ahead.
He gave Darwin some grief because he calculated that the sun was too young to have allowed time for evolution, and that's because he thought the sun was a fire burning fuel. And had no way of knowing that the sun is a nuclear
reactor. Oh, I see why he brought that up all of a sudden, because when Lord Kelvin critiqued the the possibility that the evolution, he did it by using an assumption about the nature of the sun, that it was fire. So he didn't understand nuclear physics, that it was a nuclear reactor. So his math was wrong because of a limited knowledge about what the sun was, and what it took a few conceptual revolutions before you could even understand the sun as a nuclear reactor, as opposed to just like a big fire in the sky, burning stuff, as opposed to fusion. Okay, so that just occurred to me. I just put that together. But you guys weren't with me when he was talking about this earlier, so I'll just let him continue.
And so Darwin was intimidated because physics was the senior science, and so in a way Kelvin kind of came a bit heavy on Darwin and said, well, physics proves evolution not possible. What Darwin should have said, well, the evidence for evolution is overwhelming, so your physics must be wrong.
Touche. If we go from life to intelligence, conscious self-awareness, there's a similar collection of puzzles.
That's interesting. I didn't notice that the first time. He said, if we go from life to intelligence, conscious self-awareness. So that must give you some indication of what Greene is thinking of consciousness. Excuse me. I don't have a glass of water here to drink, but I have a frog in my throat. Hope it's not conscious. Okay. Holy moly. I need to get more serious.
Obviously different in detail, but revered by many through the centuries. And in the modern era, David Chalmers is famous, down at NYU now, famous for articulating the so-called hard problem.
He said down at NYU. I forgot he's like Columbia. Oh, down at NYU, bro.
Of consciousness, right? The problem that if matter is all there is, matter and fields, and if electrons and quarks and the entities that they build up, protons and neutrons, if they have no inner world, if the lights aren't on inside an electron, if it has no inner sensation, if a third-person account precisely describes what's going on with an electron, there's nothing else. How could it possibly be that when these particles swirl together, they somehow generate an inner sensation, a quality that simply is absent at the level of the fundamental ingredients? So,
yeah, that's an interesting way to put the hard problem, which I would say more straightforwardly is just the question of why the physical basis of any conscious state is the physical basis of that state as opposed to some other state or none at all. The way he's putting it sounds more like Galen Strawson's argument. Galen Strawson's, he says he's a real physicalist, but he's a panpsychist, obviously. His view is a form of panpsychism. And his argument for it is, in my opinion, a little bit more interesting than the standard argument for panpsychism having to do with zombies or in Goff's case, the transparency of phenomenal concepts. Strawson's argument is a kind of no emergence argument, that you can't start with you can't get something at the end that wasn't in at the beginning. So that if there really is no consciousness at the fundamental level, then you're not going to be able to get it at the other end, which is our end. So that's, I would say, a slightly different take, I guess. Is that anyway? So you get what he's going for. Clearly, these are the panpsychists who he has in mind here, the ones who think that the only way out is to postulate consciousness at the fundamental level. My take on that has always been to wonder how that solves the hard problem in the way that I phrased it, which is, why is this brain state the physical basis of that conscious experience as opposed to a different one or none at all? Panpsychism doesn't help you with that question, and so in my opinion it doesn't really address the hard problem. But anyway, I'll leave my hobby horse alone. I want to hear where they're going with this. What do you think Dawkins is going to say? Do I know what Dawkins did? I think Dawkins is a physicalist, since he denies the existence of God. That much I know about his views. I don't know what he's going to say about consciousness for the most part.
He was dividing up the problems in neuroscience and brain science into those that have to do with the mechanism, the function of the brain, which ultimately can be difficult to work out, but it's clear what to do to figure out, what's going on when, my arm goes up and down, what sort of brain signals are making that happen. But he considered a qualitatively different question to be the one that I was referring to.
So that's, in Chalmers' terminology, the easy problems, the ones that can be explained recognizably because they invoke a function, and then the job is to explain how that function gets instantiated, how it's performed.
Namely, how can the lights turn on? Do you see that distinction?
Well, I always confess myself baffled by it. I do see it as a profoundly difficult problem. I am committed to the view that there is nothing there other than physics. There's nothing there other than as you say, atoms and electrons.
And I mean, I agree with you, but where does that sensibility come from? Is it based?
So he's just said he's committed to physicalism. Yeah. Hmm. Um, Interesting. I guess I'd be more committed to consciousness myself, personally. It's not that I'm against physicalism, obviously. Those who know me know I'm not. Yeah, I would have thought a commitment to physicalism. That's interesting that a commitment to consciousness would come first. We start with consciousness. Um, Physicalism, I could see how if you're a physicist or a scientist, that's all you've done your whole life is come up with physical explanations for things. And then you come to consciousness, you're like, okay, could science ever provide a explanation for this? I could see how you'd be optimistic, to be honest. Um, but don't you also have to start with consciousness? Like that we have it. I mean, he said he's baffled by it. So let me see where he's going to go with this.
On evidence?
Oh, what did he say?
They come
Oh,
from.
Brian.
I mean, I agree with you, but where does that sensibility come from? Is it based on evidence?
Yeah. See, I shouldn't have. Okay, so good question. Yes, or is it so the sensibility that all there is fields and physics? That where do you get that confidence to say that that's all that there is? And so not some non-physical thing. Um, is it based on evidence? Oh, Richard Dawkins. Well, I didn't know this was going to be an interesting discussion. Yeah.
I suppose it comes from the feeling that, as an evolutionist, we start with physics, and then we get chemistry, and we get a process, Darwinian natural selection, which gradually builds up nervous systems step by step. They get more and more complicated. I can't see any other way but that.
Could that be limited mental acuity and creative powers?
I think it has to be that.
Wow, that's refreshingly honest. Yeah, because I mean, that's a more extreme version of what I was just saying. He's saying, well, I was saying if you spend your whole life building these kind of explanations, you would have some confidence that maybe one of those could be provided. He's saying he spent his whole life building those kind of explanations, so he can't really imagine or picture how it could be something else besides that. That's a stronger view. And then so Brian's point, is that a limit on your part? And he's saying, yes, I think it is. Huh. Interesting. Okay. I mean, that's why one of the reasons I like Richard Dawkins. He's intellectually honest, I think. Interesting.
I'm more curious to know what you think, but as a physicist.
I thought I was asking the question. No, it's good. No, we actually we're going to go back and forth on questions. And I agree. I can't imagine that there's something beyond Schrodinger's equation of quantum mechanics and the interactions of the particles that's going on inside this physical structure inside of my head. But I still feel deeply puzzled by how it is that I can sit here and
what was that?
But I still feel deeply puzzled by how it is that I can sit here.
So they both admit they're puzzled. So they are saying they recognize the existence of a hard problem, but they just can't see how science will someday crack it. That's basically the feeling I'm getting. I mean, yeah, because that was one of the things that we were discussing today was, I was trying to get us to discuss, and we kind of ran out of time. But so it's oh, internet. Is there really a widespread hard problem, or is the problem intuitions, all these things about how hard consciousness understand, the result of a kind of quasi-philosophical training whereby to get people to see the problem, you have to basically give them a philosophy course. And then, I mean, I find intuitively to be obvious that there is seemingly a problem, at least. I've met people who have tried to argue that this is only because I'm a philosopher, but I don't know. So is this a widespread? These guys are not philosophers. It's seeming like they kind of, but then again, he knows who Chalmers is, so pretty much a philosopher. Anyway, interesting. Yeah. So it's interesting to think about.
And have this inner world. Everything that we do in physics and think science more generally is so focused on the third person account. We can look out, objectively see data in the world, find the patterns in that data, articulate the patterns in mathematical equations, use the mathematical equations to predict what's going to happen next or the probability of what's going to happen next in a quantum mechanical framing. And that's what we do. We never have this turn inward to try to have that same kind of rigor and description of what's happening inside of our heads. Now, what David Chalmers says is, he says that's not just a small issue, that's a huge issue, if I understand what he's saying correctly. He's saying we perhaps are missing a side of the story which would endow perhaps electrons and quarks and other particles with a degree of proto-consciousness. Maybe there's something beyond mass and charge and spin. Maybe there's something there, and only by taking into account that quality that we've been missing can a lot of those particles yield the sensations that we're all having right now.
It starts to sound dangerously like Deepak Chopra if you're not careful.
Well, I'll tell David.
Oh, hey, wait, what's he say?
That you said that.
David, that you said that. Yeah, so Deepak Chopra, that's an interesting thing to say because Deepak Chopra, I mean, I think you have to compartmentalize on the Deepak Chopra issue because I think the point is supposed to be that Chopra is an illusion, an idealist. And so that's starting to sound like idealism. I thought it started to sound like panpsychism myself. And less. Anyway, so on the Deepak Chopra issue, I kind of think of Deepak Chopra as a charlatan, but not because of idealism, but because of his like quantum mumbo jumbo about reality. And so I sort of see him as selling false hope. And when he was challenged on this, he said, if it's hope, can it be false? And I thought, gee, what a thing to say. So yeah, that's a dirty pool, old man kind of move by by Richard Dawkins there, I'd say. Is it bad to sound like an idealist? So it's bad to sound like a charlatan. So, okay. But is it bad to sound like an idealist? That's where I'd get off the boat. Because what was Brian saying? Let's go back just a sec. I want to hear what Brian's going to say in response. But what was he saying?
Maybe there's something beyond mass.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's the Russellian monism. That's not Deepak Chopra, first of all. It's not really technically beyond, but the basic idea is that the intrinsic nature of mass and all that stuff is got to make consciousness. So that's very much in line with Galen Strauss. And Chalmers is friendly to that view. He's friendly to other views too. So I wouldn't say that's Chalmers's view. But yes, okay.
A side of the story which would endow perhaps electrons and quarks and other particles with a degree of proto-consciousness. Maybe there's something beyond mass and charge and spin. Maybe there's something there, and only by taking into account that quality that we've been missing can a lot of those particles yield the sensations that we're all having right now.
It starts to sound dangerously like Deepak Chopra if you're not careful.
Well, I'll tell David that you said that.
I wonder if he did. So this is just from 6 days ago. Interesting.
Also intrigued by philosophers' thought experiments where they say things like, imagine that you could make an exact copy of every single atom of you, and there are two of you standing side by side. Which one is you?
Both. I have no doubt that they're both.
Yes, but then presumably you would have the same consciousness.
Yeah, same memories.
But then they would
diverge.
start to drift. They would start to drift apart.
Yeah, so there'd be two of me.
Yes.
I'm not sure that would be such a good thing for the world.
Well, first of all, that's a different question. Are they the same person? And would the conscious experience be the same? Because you could give an answer to one that was different to the other. So it might not be the same person, you would say, more like a twin or something, but they might have the same experience, you might say. Or you might say they would be the same person, but they might have different experiences. So those are technically separate issues and very tricky, but that's interesting that he brought that up. I thought he was going to bring up the zombie stuff.
But yeah, that's on that question. I feel secure in saying that. Obviously, if one day we can do this, it'll be the best way to find out. But part of that sensibility for me, and I'm wondering if it's the same for you, I don't think that consciousness has to take place inside a particular physical structure, the human brain or the brain of any other animal. I think that once you replicate the function, you've replicated the experience. Do you?
Yeah. So I thought he was saying something else. I think he's saying you can have computers that are conscious, so that it's a substrate independent. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you could somehow upload everything into a computer, that also would have to have our consciousness. But these, I agree with David Chalmers. It is the hard problem.
Hold on, that's surprising to hear him say that. Interesting. Okay, so, bummer.
It's certainly too hard for me, but I wouldn't take the leap to say that. Therefore, I know something like every atom must have a little smidgen of consciousness, or something like that.
No, I don't think he took that step without a great deal of difficulty. With basically banging into every possible avenue that he pursued for many years, and it almost felt like there was no other place to turn.
Interesting. I mean, that is an interesting way to frame Chalmers's intellectual journey, where he, I think, pretty much started out as like a convinced physicalist or materialist, and then thought about consciousness, and then couldn't fit it in, and tried to, and then couldn't, and then became a dualist. But he's not really a panpsychist. Panpsychism is one of like 5 views that he kind of waffles between. So one, panpsychism, obviously, but epiphenomenalism is not dead in the water. The idea that these things have no causal powers, but the physical properties do. There's also substance dualism, and he's written on versions of substance dualism, especially quantum dualism. But even in his original stuff on this, there's type D dualism for Descartes, like the substance stuff. He even acknowledges idealism as a possibility. And then finally, pan-proto-psychism might be even like a 5th option, whereby the fundamental stuff is not physical in the traditional sense, but not mental either. Okay, so yeah, let's continue this.
And having not gone through the journey that he and others who spend their lives trying to figure out consciousness have gone through, it's hard to know whether I, or perhaps even you, would feel the same way after hitting wall after wall after wall. But it's certainly the case that even on planet Earth, where we discuss that life may have had a unique origin, the arising of intelligence and conscious self-awareness, that also seems to have been a miraculously improbable event that allowed that to happen.
Yes.
Right? I mean, what if the meteor hadn't wiped out the dinosaurs? I mean, would we all be sitting here and we'd all be dinosaurs and having this conversation, or would we never have gotten to that place?
I suspect not. I mean, I think that there would be lots of dinosaurs around, but it's. I think it's a major step. We were talking about whether the origin of life was a big step, and perhaps it was. So we don't that, and I said that was a corollary of whether we think there's life elsewhere. So there might be swarms all over the universe of bacterial type life, but if we ever discovered life elsewhere, it would have to be by radio waves coming in, and that means it would have to be technologically sophisticated life, and that means it would have to have overcome another barrier, so that the barrier from bacterial level life, maybe there are several intermediate ones, and then up to the kind of life that's capable of producing radio waves that we can detect.
Right, so long if it's far enough away. I mean, if it's near enough by, in principle, we could.
If it's near enough by, yes, but I'm suspecting that's probably not. I'm suspecting that if we ever do discover extraterrestrial life, it will be by SETI, and in that case, we have the question, do we have a second barrier, or maybe a third or a fourth barrier,
Right.
and to produce the sort of intelligence? We don't have to get into consciousness. I mean, it could be unconscious, but
If it could talk to us, that would be good enough.
But if it can produce radio signals,
Right.
then that's a much more.
I mean, that's an interesting idea that the alien life could be unconscious and still intelligent and want to contact us. Huh. That's a part of the interesting book Blindsight by it's not Richard Powers. I always think it's Richard Powers. Is it Peter Watts? Maybe that's why I think it's Powers, because Watts. Blindsight has these really cool unconscious aliens in it, but that are intelligent, and so that's an interesting idea. And he thinks, huh, okay,
mundane question than the question of whether the light, as you say, the consciousness light is turned on.
So do you think I mean, if we discovered life that's not intelligent, would it make much of a difference ultimately to life here? I mean, it would be an exciting moment and so on, but would it then, we have what? It used to be that you had a week news cycle, a 24-hour news cycle. Now it's like every 10 minutes. So would this be like from 10:30 to 10:34, bacteria found on Mars, and then by 11 o'clock Trump would do something else and everyone would forget about it?
I like to think that it would change the way we think about our own life, but maybe it wouldn't. I think it really would if we were contacted by intelligent life forms elsewhere, especially as if it was intelligent enough to get its signals here, it would have to be a lot higher level than us. And so we would have a lot more to learn from them than they would learn from us. And so that really ought to shake our confidence and shake our...
Now, if it was far away, it would be a pretty slow conversation.
You couldn't have a conversation, no, that's right. But you could listen to them.
Right. So let's say we did have this conversation going. Let's say we get over the barrier somehow, we learn how to communicate with each other, and fancifully, let's imagine that the conversation happens more quickly than
500-year interval between.
So let's put all that to the side for just a second, which is certainly a technical detail. Could you imagine that the logic by which this intelligent extraterrestrial society lived and thought and worked and created would be fundamentally different from the logic here?
I love that question. I mean,
You've heard this question before? I mean,
well,
is this frequently asked to you? I feel so hackneyed. I thought it was a good question.
That's why I say I love it. I mean, clearly they would have Pythagoras' theorem. They would have numbers. They'd have geometry. They'd have. But I'm like you. I'm curious to know whether they'd have a completely different kind of question that we don't have.
Because there are in mathematics. You're probably familiar with.
I mean, so maybe they're done talking about consciousness here, but this reminds me of some of the work of Jeff Lee, the philosopher, who has argued that there could be aliens that lack what we call phenomenal consciousness, but have some other property which serves sort of the same function, but isn't phenomenal consciousness. So while there's nothing that it's like to be these aliens, they might have something which for them is just as valuable as our phenomenal consciousness. It's a challenging idea. I talked to him on my podcast, Consciousness Live, if anyone wants to see, or you could read his book on the subject. Anyway, the point though is that his claim is that whatever they have while not being consciousness could be just as valuable as what we have, which is consciousness. And that's an interesting idea to think in terms of these alien species. Could they have some purely physical thing which wasn't consciousness, so not like phenomenal consciousness, but equally valuable? I waffle on that a lot. But anyway, so it was interesting to hear these guys talk about the hard problem. They didn't really say too much. I wish they had said more about the idealism and panpsychism, but it's a live discussion. So maybe there'll be more. I'll keep watching it, but I'll report back if there's anything interesting about consciousness.